You know, it makes me slightly sad when I go on internet forums and I see people talking about how sharp prime lenses are and recommending the 50mm f1.8G Nikon lens. That lens is not very sharp. If you want a truly sharp lens, this is it. This lens is ridiculous. Hey guys, what's up? Even since before I started this YouTube channel, in fact, one of the reasons I wanted to start it was because I wanted to review cool, interesting lenses like this. This is the Samyang 135mm f2. It's basically a portrait lens, but it's one of the sharpest optics I've ever used. This actually isn't mine, it's my good friend Chris lent me his copy. I used to own this lens and I sold it, which I still regret to this day. So it has this clicky aperture ring, which allows you to control the aperture manually, or like on my Nikon camera, you set it to f22, which is in red, and then that passes through the electronics, so you can then use the normal aperture control on the camera, which is what I do. And this is actually a manual focus lens, so it has a really nice smooth manual focus ring, and you can see it's pretty cool. Both the front and the rear elements actually move when you manually focus. I think that's what Samyang means when they say it's a floating design. Either way, whatever they've done, this lens is amazingly sharp. It's really nice optically. It has no chromatic aberration, and it's relatively inexpensive. In the UK, it's around £450 at the moment. I think this lens is best on full frame. It'll give you that really nice portrait length and that really nice shallow depth of field. But if you use this lens on a DX camera, if you do the crop factor math, what you'll discover is that it's actually equivalent to a 200mm f3. So this is a 70 to 200mm f2.8, and it costs about 6 times more than the Samyang. At the long end, this is a 200mm f2.8. So basically 200mm f3 versus 200mm f2.8, you're going to get very similar results with the Samyang on a APS-C body than you will with this lens on a full frame body. So that gives you an idea. I mean, this is obviously a completely different lens. It's autofocus, it's a zoom, it's designed for action, it's pro, and you can't really compare them directly. But if you just want a lens that's long and has a big aperture, then the Samyang is definitely a good option to look at. And you know, honestly, if I had to choose between shooting this lens and this for portraits, most of the time, as long as I was in a fairly controlled sort of environment, I would probably go for the Samyang. If I was shooting like, you know, any type of sports or anything like that, then obviously I'm definitely going to go for the 70 to 200. But you'd be surprised how good the results on this lens are. In fact, why don't we get into Lightroom, and I want to actually go through and show you some pictures of some of the results this lens can get. And when I say this lens is sharp, I'm not joking. Like on lenstip.com, this was, I think up until recently, the sharpest lens they'd ever tested, apart from a couple like the Zeiss 135mm lens, which was pretty much the same as this. It's just made by Zeiss and is way higher priced, obviously. I think now the Sigma Art 135mm has beaten it as well. So there's definitely a trend with 135mm lenses being supremely sharp, and this one is up there with those. This really is one of the sharpest lenses you can possibly put on your camera. Anyway, let's get into the pictures. So here we are. I've just put together a few images. These were taken mostly 2 or 3 years ago on my D810, which was my main camera at the time. And I don't know, there's just something about the quality of this lens. Like, I'm kind of tempted to use words like dreamy and has like a glow to it. Some people might say, oh, it has micro contrast. I don't know what it is. I've used much more expensive lenses that don't even have this quality. I think my best guess is that it's a combination of being very sharp, having a wide aperture like f2, being a telephoto focal length, which gives you this really nice, smooth, blurred out background. And also another thing that I think is important is it has a distinct lack of longitudinal chromatic aberration. That's the type of chromatic aberration which is hard to fix. You can't just click a button in Lightroom to get rid of it. I'll show an example of how bad it looks on some lenses, like in particular some of the Nikon primes, like the 85 f1.4 has it really badly, the 85 f1.8 has it, and even the new 105 f1.4 has it. Alright, so this is a shot with the Nikon 85 f1.8 G lens. This is an amazing portrait lens, but it has one massive downside, and that's longitudinal chromatic aberration, which it suffers from pretty badly. So here's another shot of Sue. This one's backlit, and as you can see, it's nice and sharp. Maybe not quite as sharp as the Samyang lens that I'm talking about in this video, but it's sharp to the point where you can even see droplets of breath because it was a cold morning. It's quite cool. Anyway, these neon colors are actually severe longitudinal chromatic aberration, which is admittedly is worse when a subject is backlit like this. But you can see, like on some of these more out of focus hairs at the back here, they have weird like green colors in them, and if we go down here to these other out of focus areas, you can see there are just some weird like green and magenta colors. So that's what I'm talking about when I'm talking about longitudinal chromatic aberration. So yeah, this was taken on the D810, which is 36 megapixels full frame. Just going to zoom in here. So I think I did miss focus slightly on this shot, not by much, but the eyelashes are just a touch out of focus. I think the eyebrow hairs are actually a bit sharper. But if you come down, you can kind of see this is actually where the focal plane is. So there's a lot of detail being picked up right on the focal plane. And as you can see, as things fade out of focus, there's no discoloration of any kind. I think a term I hear quite often is people say a lens is Zeiss-like, and I think that's what they mean. They mean the way it falls out of focus is very neutral. So that's a quality that I really love about this lens, and it kind of stands out when you start shooting with it, because you're shooting wide open. You don't want to have any chromatic aberration in those areas that are just slightly out of focus. So here's Sue again, sitting on a old fallen tree. You probably can't really tell, but I'm standing pretty far away. Remember, it's a 135mm focal length, so it's sort of telephoto, so you have to stand quite far back. But it gives you this nice, there's not really much perspective going on in the scene. It gives you quite a nice like neutral view. Sue's nice and sharp, the background is nice and blown out. Looks like I was crouching down here. And when we zoom in 1:1, yes, it's sharp. Looks like I pretty much nailed focus. Maybe I was very slightly off, but it looks fine. Oh, and I think this image is slightly cropped. Okay, so here's another one. So we were obviously out on a walk or a hike. She was walking in front of me down this path. She turned around and I got the shot, so you get this sort of effect of the path going out of focus in the distance. Whoops. And on this one, so again here I slightly missed focus. You can see that this eye is slightly blurry. This eye is sort of not fully in focus, but just about there. And then the areas that are in focus are actually more like just behind, like these hairs and stuff up here. But if you can imagine, if you're looking through the viewfinder, even on a full frame camera, which has quite a big viewfinder, you can't tell with this level of resolution whether this eye's in focus or this eye's in focus. You just can't when you're looking through a viewfinder. So you need good manual focus technique. One of the ways to do that is to use the back screen when you're focusing and just zoom into 1:1. If you have a mirrorless camera, the manual focus on this lens is actually going to be much easier to nail because mirrorless cameras give you a load of focus aids like focus peaking, and I believe you can also punch into 100% zoom to focus. So you'll be able to punch in and focus on the eye, no problem with a mirrorless camera. Okay, here's another shot. I think this one is a bit cropped as well. So that's the full crop. And the reason I point that out, by the way, is because, well, basically crop factor comes into play. So if instead of cropping the image, I had walked forward so that this became my frame, I would actually have even more background blur. So in a way, by cropping, this gives the lens a slight disadvantage. So I'm just showing what the original frame would have looked like. And this one is nice and sharp. Again, I'm not sure if it's 100% perfectly on the focal plane. I think I can say that some of the stones just here are maybe a little bit more in focus than the ones here, which tells me that the focal plane is maybe 20 centimeters, 30 centimeters in front of Sue. But it's still a nice shot. It's very sharp. You wouldn't complain about this or anything. Okay, so here's another shot of Sue. In this case, I found a place where I've been able to put the background really far away, and that gives you this nice sort of blurred out background with the subject sharply in focus, and it is sharp, I think we'll see. I took these pictures a while ago, like 2 or 3 years, so back then the default in Lightroom was actually, I think, 25 sharpening. Now they've changed it to 40, but I've just increased the masking a bit as well, just to tame down some of this noise a little bit. So if you're looking at the ISO 100, this image is I actually underexposed this by nearly 4 stops. So yeah, the exposure was way off. That's my fault. I was shooting in manual, probably had manual ISO. But anyway, the D810 doesn't have much problem recovering shadows, so I was able to pull everything up. But the noise is more like an ISO 800 or 1600 shot, I'm not sure. So that's why it looks noisy. Yeah, but anyway, so down in the corners here, I'm going to zoom in even more, 2:1, and I think I can like just about see the tiniest bit of chromatic aberration. It's really not bad at all. But if you want to fix it, bink, there, it's gone. Here's another shot. This one's very similar to the last one, just in the same area, just in a slightly different location. Again, nice and sharp on the face. Tons of detail on the clothing and everything like that. And the background's nicely blurred out. Nice soft light. This is kind of one of the nice conditions that I like to shoot in, so. Alright, yeah, so this is actually Sue's dad. He uses this heat gun to basically get the barbecue started. I don't know why I put this image in here, just something about it looks nice. I don't know, it's like the lighting, the kind of, there's just so much detail and quality in the image. You just don't get images like this out of, you know, lower end cheap glass. Oh yeah, so here's a cat, and is this one cropped? No, this one's uncropped. So yeah, again, just to show, it's really sharp. I can't remember how I focused, if I was using the viewfinder or the back screen, but I did manage to nail focus right on the cat's face, and as you can see, it's nice and sharp. If you zoom in on the ground, you can actually see the focal plane extending all the way up to the edges. Here's another cat, and this one I think is quite heavily cropped. But again, the sense of depth that you get in a scene like this, where you have the background is a bit further away and then you have some nice elements coming in up into the frame from the bottom, gives you just this really nice sense of depth. And it looks like I focused just about right on the cat, maybe slightly back focused, but it's not bad. This is my nephew Sam, and I don't know, there's something about this shot. It has a really nice contrasty quality to it. I don't think I've done much to the settings. Sharpening's 25. It's a couple of minor edits. Oh, the blacks are dragged down a bit, so I'll reset it just so you can see the original. But yeah, again, just tons of sharpness. The eye is very nicely in focus, and the eyelashes are a bit out of focus. That's just the nature of using a really shallow depth of field lens. And if you're in doubt about the sharpness, like the eyebrows up here, you can see are really nice and crisp. Okay, so here's an image that I actually took probably about a week or two ago. This one's backlit, and I think there must have been a bit of sun hitting the lens, so you can see you've got this veiling flare, which makes the image look a bit washed out. If you compare that to the last image, this has contrast and clarity essentially. This one is quite washed out, and that's because there's literally sun hitting the lens. So you could see this as a downside of the lens. If I was being more careful, I could have blocked it out using my hand over the top of the lens to make sure that no sunlight was hitting it. But I think you could argue that this is a nice effect, and in some cases you do want this flare. It adds a bit more of a dreamy look. Again, I think this one I slightly missed focus. You can see the eyebrow hairs here are nice and sharp, and also the fibers of the wool hat. It's just, that gives you an idea of how sharp the lens is, and also no problems with any chromatic aberration as it goes out of focus. And then the nice rim light from the backlighting. And this was pretty challenging conditions. I mean, you can see how bright the sunlight was hitting Sue's hair, so I think this is a great result. Oh, and again, this was on a D850 because I took it just recently, whereas all the other pictures were on a D810. So this even has a little bit more resolution, and you can see there's still no problem with getting sharp. Like the fibers here are just insanely sharp, and this was wide open again at f2. And I think this image is completely unedited, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, you could, if you wanted to try and fix the flare, you could go in and try and add dehaze and stuff, but I kind of like it the way it is, so. So obviously I'm talking about this lens, I'm kind of recommending it. Am I biased? I mean, I think it would be a bit insulting to say, oh, I'm completely unbiased. Yes, I probably am a bit biased. This lens is kind of special to me. I've taken some of my favorite pictures with it. But I don't think that's all down to me. I think the lens itself is really good, and that's why I like it so much. I'm just really putting this out there as a sort of lower cost alternative for maybe photographers who are just getting into portrait photography or who just want something a bit different. You do need to have a bit of patience to work with the manual focus, but when you nail it, the results are definitely worth it. Also, I think that there's something to be said about when you're working with a manual focus lens like this, you're working at a bit of a slower pace, and you're also stepping back from the model. And I think that can have a sort of psychological effect where the model feels a bit more relaxed, they'll pose a bit more naturally, so you might catch some different expressions. I think just all in all, there are just so many little things going on with this lens that all just add up to it being quite a cool lens. Like it's small, you can chuck this in your bag easily. Unlike the Sigma version, which is massive and fat and heavy, this is actually not too bad. It's all metal construction, by the way. I think it's aluminium, according to Samyang's site. And yeah, look at that aperture. Yeah, so I guess I'm done. Yeah, I love this lens. I'm actually sort of tempted to pick another one up just because I like shooting with it so much, and I think it gives you a bit of a different look and experience than just like a normal 70-200. So if you're interested in this lens, I will put a link down in the video description, which you can check out. And yeah, I think that's all there is to it. I hope you like the format of this video. It's something a bit new. I kind of like the idea of just going through some shots on my PC and just showing the results that I got. If you liked it, hit like and subscribe. Thanks very much. And yeah, I'll see you in the next video, which will probably be about photographing deer, foxes, or baby animals, because we're in spring now. So yeah, alright, see ya.